Good day. I'd like to talk to you today about why we do what we do. So I want to ask you some questions and suggest that you think through the answers and develop them for yourself, because Nietzsche said a man with a why can endure any how. And so I think it's really valuable to think through why we do what we do, and if we can align that and act in concert with why in terms of how and what, then we end up being a lot stronger. And when life throws itself at us from the side, as it always seems to do, in the Bible it says, the winds blew and the rains fell. And that happens in every life. I don't think anyone gets away without it. When you know why you care about what you care about, I think it makes you much stronger in handling what and in knowing how you want to go about that. So why you do what you do is very personal. It's up to you. And I don't know that you need to share that with a lot of people. I think it's more valuable for you to know inside, because who you are is very personal. And why you do what you do is going to be unique to every person. And there are a million answers to this question. A lot of times they boil down to very similar categories. It becomes common because there are certain things that are noble and worthwhile and certain things that are not noble and worthwhile. And if you think through the kind of people that you admire, the specific people that you admire, why do you admire one person and not have much respect for another person? Or one person you don't really notice them. They don't grab your attention. Whereas another person seems admirable to you, seems respectable. I think it's because you see that their why aligns with yours, and virtually everyone thinks that when someone lives or acts generously toward others, that's admirable. That's something we value. We respect that. And so, but there are different ways that you can act toward others. There are certain character traits that one person finds admirable that another doesn't. But I think a lot of them come down to how you treat someone else. And specifically, whether you take on voluntarily, not grudgingly. Grudgingly seems to invalidate this. But if you will take on voluntarily responsibility for other people and take on a role that works in service toward other people, you end up respecting that and others end up respecting that. But more importantly, while that is admirable, and I think it's worthwhile to think about who and what you admire, because that will help you recognize those things that you respect. And that will help you recognize what your values are, and then you can more easily align to those. Excuse me, let me adjust this for a second. Okay, don't fight with me, camera. So, the traits that almost everyone admires are when you see someone taking responsibility for someone else. If you have two children and the older child, 6 years old, knows how to read, that's great for a 6-year-old, but your 4-year-old child gets sick and is in bed all day, and the 6-year-old child takes the time virtually all day to go sit in the bed of the sick 4-year-old and reads to them, then you're going to appreciate, respect, admire the 6-year-old, not because of the skill they had. Quite a few 6-year-olds can read. It's because of how they chose to spend their time and why they did the reading. And so it's the voluntary assumption of responsibility or care toward others that ends up being respectable. And so because of this, I would submit to you that very often someone's why becomes a story of who. It becomes about relationships. because we are very social. We're born into families. We live in a family economy. It's a topic for another time. People work and build and save as a family unit, not as individuals. And they bring home what they bring home and they share it with their family. We're very, very social. And so very often people's why for working, why for having self-control, why for not degrading into impulsive behavior without self-restraint is usually a story of who they care for. Usually it's a story of who is important in their life that they've taken responsibility for, that they care about. And so it's very common that in thinking about why you work and why you want to fashion yourself in a way that makes you more effective and makes you more of the person you could be, that makes you develop your own potential. Theoretically, I suppose, people could do that because it's the right thing to do, because they're egotistical, because they'll make more money. And these seem to be very shallow and not long-term, not long-lived motivations. The motivations that tend to stick with us have to do with who we care for and what we owe to them. So I think it's worth taking an assessment in your life of who matters to you and what role you have to play in their life and who you can be to and for them, because I think that usually becomes our why. Excuse me. Now, there are two aspects of why that I think are predominant. One is, like we talked about before, when you have a sick child, no one questions why it's worthwhile to stick with your word. So if you're at the bedside of a sick child with a terrible fever, they're in pain, they don't know what happened, they didn't do anything wrong, but they're in pain. We always say two things. People always say two things. Number one, you say, I'm here with you, I care about you. And you don't abstract that you care about them, you sit right there with them. You reach out and you touch them. You get a cold compress for their head. And so physically being with someone, showing that you care because you're there, and you demonstrate that they are worth your time. That's number one. And then number two, you'll say, you stay here, I'm going to leave. And the reason I'm going to leave you is because if I leave, I can go do something for you and bring something back that's going to help. So you want to be with people you care about, especially when they're struggling. But often you'll leave because you know there's some acetaminophen downstairs, Tylenol. And the Tylenol is a fever reducer. And so if you go get them some Tylenol, then in 20 minutes, they're going to feel significantly better. So you'll leave, and no one thinks it's okay to tell the child, I'll be right back, I'm going to get some Tylenol, and instead go downstairs and put in a PS4 game and play for 3 hours and not bring it to them. I don't need to tell you that form of insincerity, that form of selfish activity, it doesn't fit, it doesn't align. Because what you say and what you do need to align, because that's who you are. That's how you live out who you are. So you've got this child that you care about sitting there. They're in pain. Your why is painfully obvious. Why you're going to do something is because someone for whom you care is in pain, and you're going to do what you can about it. And we only respect those people who do something in that situation. And that's not hard to describe. Everyone understands it. So I think that one half of our why is usually to be prepared to handle the inevitable suffering that's going to come for people we care about, the inevitable struggles, the needs they're going to have that we want to provide so that they can avoid suffering. So the elimination of pain is usually the first half, and sometimes it's the most powerful half. If people say to themselves, I don't care, I'm just going to live my own life, and I'm not going to worry about getting my act together, and that's just all dumb, and that's just my teacher telling me I need to do that, and that's not a good idea. Why do they turn around and by the time they're 30, they're an accomplished person, they're keeping it between the lines? That's usually because they've run into pain. Pain is a teacher. Pain brings focus. And so the avoidance of pain is often the beginning motivation to become more than who we are and to develop into more than who we are. And sometimes it's our own pain. Sometimes we realize this habit I have is tearing me down and it's hurting me inside or hurting me physically, and you have to stop that. But the most powerful motivator tends to be children's pain, our children's pain, our spouse's pain, someone we care about, maybe a parent's pain, and you see your mom suffering and you say, I'm going to do something about that. And that's often the most motivating. So when you think about why, it usually resolves into people you care about, relationships, responsibilities you voluntarily adopt and take on in your life. And then it breaks into twofold from there. One is the elimination of pain, and the other is development of something good, beautiful, harmonious. Yes, I'm getting into those words. We all know there are things that are valuable that are when they're right. And it can be a healthy family gathering. It can be, everyone likes some form of music. Why do you like that music? Because it's right, because it speaks to something, because it's more true, it represents reality. There's something about music when it's done right. There's something about a family gathering when everyone's together and people aren't hypocritical, they're genuine and caring for each other, they're playing the role that they have in the family. There's something right about that. It's so frustrating when it's wrong, it drives us crazy. But if you can build it to be right, that's motivating and worthwhile. And generally, it seems like the stick, the avoidance of pain, is a little more motivating to us than the carrot, the painting a picture of what could be and building toward that. And that's kind of sad, but that's kind of reality. So it seems to me there's two of those in life, and we vacillate back and forth between them. And the more time we can spend building and thinking about what we want to build for those we love and care about, that is right and wholesome and forthright and clean and healthy, the more we can move toward that, the healthier we'll be. But in addition, the more we move toward that, the more prepared we are when life comes out of left field. When the winds blow, when life comes at you sideways and you're sideswiped by sickness, by a car wreck that somehow insurance figures out a way not to pay for. And so now you have this financial burden. You're ready for it because you've been building towards something positive. And so I think that there are these two motivations. Maybe for you there's a cause that you care about. You want to end something terrible you see in the earth. If that's your why, great. I'm not saying it needs to be relationships. I'm just saying it very commonly is. So if you think through your why, I think it's worthwhile to write these things down. I've never been a big journaling person in my life, but more and more I'm beginning to think that's not a bad idea. Having said that, if you write these down, if you sit down with your spouse, if you talk with someone you respect about this is one of those things I don't think you need to broadcast. I don't think you need to bring this to work and tell everybody. You can, and that could be okay, but sometimes this is very personal, and what motivates you and why can sometimes be very deep, and sometimes you just keep that inside. But I think it's worthwhile for you to remember and to give some thought at least every month, if not more often, as to why. Because the why of what you do becomes the backdrop, it becomes the framework for how you do and what you do in your life. So if you'll carry with you your why, if you think through what really motivates you, if you think through what you find valuable and good and who you care about, then the elimination of pain, the elimination of suffering, the preparation for handling that when the time comes. There's a little bit of a Boy Scout in each of us. Be prepared. Always be prepared. So that when difficulty comes into our life or into the lives of those that we consider ours, then we're ready to fill our role and be what we can be to stop that suffering. That's a good backdrop. It's also good to know what I think is good and right and true and healthy and beautiful and worth building, and work on building those things. And if we have that backdrop, it's a framework that will affect everything else we do, because how we do things is generally born out of why we're doing what we're doing and what we really value. So I suggest that you take some time to think about that. Take some time to speak with someone you respect and trust, or write some of these things down. Who do I care about? What can I do to eliminate pain in their life? What could I do to minimize the likelihood of pain in the future? And what can I do to build something that I value? What could I do, whether it's, I mentioned family gatherings because that's valuable to me. For other people, it might be, I'm terrible at ideas. I'm going to stop. I'm not going to throw things out. What do you find valuable that in a year, if you looked back in the year and you had done this, or you had helped build that you would say, that was worthwhile, that was good, I value that. If you have that in the back of your mind, and if that's a framework in which you see the world, it will help organize your thoughts, your actions. It will take your actions of what you do and your how you do it, and it will align them so that you'll end up being strong, you'll end up being resilient when unfairness comes at you, and it will, because that somehow always happens in life. Partly because life is unfair, and partly because we're unfair to others. Let's face it, sometimes you're the perpetrator of unfairness on other people in other situations. And while we want to minimize that, let's just be honest, we all are on occasion, and we need to think about that. But when unfairness comes, if you have kind of built into your background perspective why you're doing what you're doing, what you value, it will make you a stronger person, and it will make you a more content person, and you'll live with a more clean conscience. So when life comes at you, instead of dealing with guilt inside and mixing you up, you're looking at what came and you're saying, all right, what are we going to do about this? I've been working for this. I've been trying to prepare myself reasonably. I may not be ready, but let's go. How do we handle it? And so that's my suggestion for you over time in your life. This probably doesn't happen in a week, probably doesn't happen in one time. But if you sit down and give some thought to this and revisit it for a year, you'll come to realize what you really do value. Usually we trick ourselves and we say we value something, but if we watch our actions, we watch our lives, we'll find out we don't. As we can bring that into alignment, you become a stronger person, a more resilient person, a more effective person. You'll become more capable because you'll remember what you actually care about, what you care about, not what someone else tells you you should care about, what you care about. And you'll become the person you were created to be. You'll become the person you have the potential to be. You'll become yourself in a more full way. Thanks for listening. Remember who you are and what you stand for.